Welcome, friends, to this course on understanding absurdist drama. We are in week 2, and this is going to be lecture number 4. Today, we would continue to discuss the text of the play Waiting for Godot. Our focus today is on what happens in Act 2 of the play. One of the great Beckettian scholars has argued that in Waiting for Godot, nothing happens twice. There are same characters, Vladimir, Estragon, Pozzo, Lucky, the boy, and of course, invisible and absent Godot. Like the first act, Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot by the tree. Pozzo and Lucky happen to pass by. The boy comes and announces that Godot will not come today, but he will come tomorrow for sure. So what changes in Act 2? So there are some changes. The tree, which was barren in Act 1, has a few leaves in Act 2. This slight change could imply a passage of time or also suggest a faint, perhaps illusory hope, though its significance remains ambiguous throughout the play. Vladimir and Estragon have also forgotten what had happened the day before. Vladimir and Estragon do not remember what had happened yesterday. They don't remember the place. They don't remember the time. In fact, they suffer from absolute amnesia. We'll go into the details of this forgetfulness of Vladimir and Estragon and its metaphorical significance in time to come. Additionally, there is a transformation in the characters of Pozzo and Lucky. In Act 1, Pozzo was authoritative, powerful, sovereign, autonomous, who was dominating Lucky. In Act 2, he has become blind and helpless. Lucky, who you would remember gave a long monologue, which was of course nonsensical, but having deep philosophical meaning, becomes dumb in the second act. This transformation intensifies the sense of suffering and serves a grim commentary on human degradation and dependence. Pozzo's blindness and Lucky's silence reflect the inevitability of physical decline and the loss of purpose. Similarly, the boy who happens to visit Vladimir and Estragon in second act is perhaps changed. We cannot say with certainty that this is the same boy who had come yesterday. He appears again, claiming that Godot will come tomorrow, reinforcing the endless cycle of anticipation and disappointment. Now, we can safely say that the second act is nothing but a repetition of the first act with minor variations. Vladimir and Estragon still indulge in ideal chatter. They still talk of suicide. They still discuss the weather. And of course, they also imitate. First, they imitate becoming a tree. Later on, they also imitate becoming Pozzo and Lucky. Perhaps that is one of the major differences that you would find out in Act 1 and in Act 2. Now, we'll briefly discuss the major ideas discussed in Act 2. In the midst of despair, happiness is a central theme that Beckett is discussing. After the passing of the night, When Vladimir and Estragon are separated, they meet again, they are reunited. And therefore, one of them believes that it can be a moment of celebration, it can be a moment of happiness because it is a moment of reunion or meeting again. Now let us discuss the conversation between Vladimir and Estragon to understand how they look at this moment of reunion and whether it contributes to any philosophical understanding of happiness or not. But before that, let us discuss how happiness has been viewed in Western philosophical system. Now, happiness is a very important aspect of human life. In fact, all human beings search for happiness. In the absence of happiness, life will be miserable and of course not worth living. Western philosophers have asked some very key questions regarding the notion of happiness. They have asked what human beings want in their life, and if they want happiness in their lives, how can they be happy, and whether human beings have the ability to be happy or not. Democritus, an ancient Greek philosopher, argues that happiness is a thing of mind. It does not depend upon favor of God or external circumstances. He contends that happiness is a case of mind and therefore happiness is subjective. Now, hedonist philosophers considered that happiness can also be defined as the pursuit of pleasure. If human beings can find out pleasure in life, they may become happy. Epicurus, whose work was dominated by hedonism, contended that in fact virtue and pleasure are interdependent and therefore a good life or a happy life must be a life of virtue and a life of pleasure. Therefore, we can safely argue that happiness can be defined as either a virtuous life or a pleasurable life or a combination of both. Christian saints and philosophers would argue that virtue alone is not a sufficient criterion for being happy. It's not enough that a life lived on the basis of reason and morality can be enough for making a person happy. They suggested that earthly happiness is impermanent and the true happiness requires the blessings of God, and that's why favorable luck or the blessings of God becomes a very important aspect of happiness in Christian framework. Later, secular philosophers like Jeremy Bentham would talk about happiness in utilitarian terms. Bentham would propose his famous dictum of maximum happiness of maximum numbers, thereby reducing happiness to quantitative satisfaction of or in life. Now, if we try to understand how Beckett looks at happiness, we need to focus on this conversation between Vladimir and Estragon. Vladimir says, "You must be happy, too deep down if you only knew it." Estragon says, "Happy about what?" Vladimir says, "To be back with me again." Estragon says, "Would you say so?" Vladimir says, "Say you are, even if it is not true." Estragon says, what am I to say? Vladimir says, say, I am happy. Estragon says, I am happy. Vladimir, so am I. Estragon, so am I. Vladimir, we are happy. Estragon, we are happy. What do we do now? Now that we are happy, Vladimir says, wait for Godot, and Estragon groans. Now, when Estragon asks Vladimir about what he should be happy, Vladimir gives him a very short, pithy answer, and he says about their reunion. Beckett is suggesting that happiness can be found only in smaller moments of life, although human beings look for happiness in greater moments. For example, we celebrate moments of happiness when we get something big in our life. For example, a job. For example, our marriage may be a matter of celebration. The birth of our child or children may be a matter of celebration. Their marriage can be a matter of celebration. But if we reduce happiness to bigger moments, we forget the essential philosophical aspect of human life, which is that happiness has to be found in each and every moment that we are living. Beckett has rightly said in Act 1 of the play, never neglect little things of life, because these little things of life also have potential to make you happy, which you constantly ignore. And therefore, Beckett's conception is clear that happiness is to be experienced. Now, there is another very important philosophical point which Beckett is proposing. Vladimir says, say, I am happy. Estragon says, I am happy. Vladimir repeats, so am I. Estragon repeats, so am I. And together they say, we are happy. What Beckett is suggesting? Beckett is suggesting, like Democritus, that happiness is a subjective attitude. Like Sisyphus, we must imagine that we are happy. Because even if we are happy and we don't imagine that we are happy, we will not be happy. And therefore, even if we have nothing, even if life is difficult, even if life is miserable, there is a possibility of human beings being happy if they have a consciousness of happy, if, like Camus suggests, human beings can imagine that they are happy even if they are not. So, Beckettian dictum is similar to the hypothesis of Camus, who has said one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Vladimir and Estragon here are proposing that they must imagine themselves happy, and therefore Beckett is suggesting that all human beings must imagine themselves happy. Unless they imagine they are happy, they can never be happy. And therefore the manual of happiness suggested by Beckett is very simple. Happiness is not gratification of human desires, because human desires are unlimited. If one desire is satisfied, it will give birth to another desire, and desire will always lead to discontentment. So unless human beings cultivate and develop this idea in their mind that they are happy, happiness will remain an illusion. We also need to understand here that our search for happiness may also be futile. Even if I am imagining that I am happy and I am not happy, what it suggests? That my idea of happiness is just an illusion. So Beckett is also stealthily suggesting that human beings' search for happiness may be futile, may be waste, and therefore human beings must live in the moment. They must live each and every moment, because by living in each and every moment, human beings can ease their suffering and thereby they can be happy. So, now that Vladimir and Estragon are happy, they are waiting for Godot like they were waiting for Godot before. And like in Act 1, Pozzo and Lucky reappear. As I have already told you, Pozzo has gone blind, Lucky has gone dumb. Pozzo is helpless, Pozzo is crying for help, although they don't help crying Pozzo. Rather, one of them asks him, since when Lucky has been dumb, and that infuriates Pozzo, and he scolds them by saying this very famous speech. Pozzo says, have you not done tormenting me with your accursed time? It is abominable when one day, is that not enough for you? One day like any other day? One day he went dumb, one day I went blind, one day we will go deaf, one day we were born, one day we shall die, the same day, the same second. Is that not enough for you? They give birth astride of a grave, the light gleams an instant, then it is night once more, he jerks the rope on. Now what we understand by what Pozzo is saying? Pozzo is referring to the passing of time. Time passes like a thief. We are not aware of its passing. It's ticking, tick, tick, tick. We cannot hear it ticking, yet it is passing. All of a sudden, we become aware that tomorrow, for which we had all the illusions, for which we were hopeful, it had suddenly become a present and later a moment of past. Now, let us briefly discuss the notion of time in the Western philosophical framework before we examine this speech by Pozzo in greater detail. Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, argues for the constant flow and change of time. He has famously said that you cannot step into the same river twice. What he is trying to say, that if you want to catch the flow of time, you cannot. Like if you want to hold the water of the river in your hand, you cannot, because the moment you want to hold the water of the river into your hands, the water has already flown ahead. Augustine, a Christian philosopher, considered that time is a feature of human consciousness. He argued that time past, time present and time future exist only in human consciousness, only in human mind. Newton considered time as a constant independent entity flowing uniformly regardless of human perception. Although his idea was challenged by Kant, the very famous German philosopher, who proposed that time and space are not external realities but a priori institutions of human consciousness. Kant saw time as a necessary condition for organizing experiences integral to human condition and cognition rather than an external reality. Bergson, another very famous philosopher, divided time into mathematical time and duration. Mathematical time refers to quantitative time and duration refers to qualitative time or subjective perception of time. Bergson saw time as fundamentally connected to consciousness, advocating for a lived experience of time as a continuous flow. Now, after this brief introduction to the philosophy of time, let us re-examine what Pozo is saying. Pozo calls time accursed time. What he means by that? It refers to the fact that time is passing in such a manner that someone who is born young, a day comes, a moment comes when the same person who was born young as an infant becomes old and soon may die. And therefore, time is like a torture machine which torments human mind, human consciousness. When human beings become aware that time is fleeting, their end is coming near, their death is approaching. Pozo says, and I read again, one day, is that not enough for you? Is one day not enough for us? Why do we want to divide time into past, present and future? Why do we want to divide time into number of years? Why do we want to divide time into months? What difference does this quantitative division of time make? Whether time is a linear line or, as Indian philosophical framework suggests, that time is repetitive, time is circular. Now, these are some of the philosophical questions that Pozo's speech is suggesting. Pozo is saying, is not one moment enough for us? Why we want to divide time into these, what you call mathematical breakups? And he says, one day, is that not enough? One day like any other day? One day he went dumb, one day I went blind, one day we'll go deaf, one day we are born. That's very important. And what will happen one day? One day we shall die. All human beings are born one day, and all human beings will die one day. Now what we have in between? In between our birth and in between our death. Between the moments of birth and the moments of death, what we have? We have time. And we divide that time into seconds, into minutes, into hours, into days, into weeks, into months, into years. And we believe that longer we live, the more meaningful our life is. But is it so? Is not time leading us towards our death, which is inevitable? And that's why for Pozo, time is accursed. It is something which is tormenting his mind, which is torturing his consciousness. Because Pozo understands that the passing of time will lead human beings to the grave. There are very few moments of light. Light is there only for an instant, and then there is night. And that's why Pozo is asking human beings to understand the fact that whether we want or we don't want, whether we desire or we don't desire, whether we like it or we don't like it, time is passing, time will pass, and a time will come when all of us who are born, we will die. Although this advice of Pozo regarding time to Vladimir and Estragon will be completely ignored. Yet, there is a moment in the play when Pozzo and Lucky have left Vladimir and Estragon again, and Estragon is sleeping. Vladimir speaks a soliloquy. He speaks to himself and he tries to meditate upon both the passing of time and nature of existence. What Vladimir says, let us examine it. Was I sleeping while others suffered? Am I sleeping now? Tomorrow when I wake or think I do, what shall I say of today? That with Stragon my friend, at this place until the fall of night, I waited for Godot. That Pozzo passed with his carrier, and that he spoke to us, probably, but in all that what truth will there be? He will know nothing. He will tell me about the blows he received, and I'll give him a carrot. Astride of a grave and difficult birth, down in the hole, lingeringly the grave digger puts on the forceps. We have time to grow old, the air is full of our cries, but habit is a great deadener. At me too someone is looking, of me too someone is saying, he is sleeping, he knows nothing, let him sleep on, I cannot go on, what have I said? Vladimir's soliloquy is a reflection on existential despair, uncertainty, and the elusive nature of meaning and memory. Vladimir says, what will I remember of today, tomorrow? Will I remember my today, tomorrow or not? If I ask you, what did you do yesterday? Can you tell me exactly what did you do yesterday? When did you wake up? What did you do when you woke up? When did you go to brush your teeth and take your bath? What did you eat? Where did you go? Who did you meet? What were the words that you spoke? Can you remember anything in detail? Can you describe everything in detail? The fact of the matter is that you remember only gist of your today, tomorrow. Means tomorrow you remember only the summary of what you have done. You don't remember each and everything in detail. Why? Because memory functions in such a way that it remembers selectively. It remembers only important moments of life and it ignores or forgets all other important moments which brain or memory thinks is unimportant. And that's why Vladimir is saying, is asking, what will I remember of today, tomorrow? And then he says, what I'll remember? I'll remember that I was waiting with my friend Estragon and I was waiting for Godot. I would remember that Pozzo had come with his carrier Lucky. I would remember that my friend Estragon was hungry and I gave him a carrot to eat. But what are all these things? What Vladimir would remember? Vladimir would remember only facts. He would not remember or he would not understand the truth. And therefore, Vladimir is making a distinction between fact of life and truth of life. The truth of life is whether you remember or you don't remember, it makes no sense. And we also have to understand that suffering is inextricably linked to memory. We mostly suffer because we remember too much of our past, or we suffer because we imagine too much about our future. So suffering is a byproduct of either remembrance of the past or anticipation of the future. What would happen if we try to forget our past and if we try not to anticipate about our future? Don't you think our lives will be happier when we ignore both our past and our future? Vladimir says that we have to focus on two very important aspects of human life, and these moments are birth and death. He says, stride of a grave and a difficult birth. A stride of a grave and difficult birth suggests that life itself is a struggle between birth and death, with death always looming, with death always impending, with death always approaching nearer and nearer. And there is a grave digger who is lingering, who is preparing the grave for all of us, although we have forgotten. We have forgotten, and therefore we start thinking that we have time to grow old. While we are young, we don't imagine that we will grow old. And all of a sudden, you see gray hairs on your head, gray hairs on your face, and that happens all of a sudden. One day you wake up, like Pojo has said, and you find out, you discover that you have gray hairs and gray beards, and that symbolizes you have grown old. How did it happen? It happened because time was passing and we were not aware of the passing of time. And a day would also come when we would realize that my life has come to an end, and we would realize that now I am dying. That may not be a moment of self-consciousness. That may not be a moment of self-awareness. We may not have been enlightened yet. That moment is bound to come. That moment is certain to come. That moment is inevitable. Now the question is, why do we forget that human beings are mortal? That I am also supposed to die? Because we are lost into the world in such a manner that we become oblivious to death. Because we are so much lost into the habits of life, the routines of life, that makes us forget the fact that life is temporal, it is short, it is brief, that human life is ephemeral on this earth. Vladimir's statement that habit is a great deadener reflects how repetitive routines numb human beings to the mysteries and horrors of existence. Habit allows them to endure pain, to endure purposelessness, to suppress their confusion, but it also numbs their sense of agency or profound death. And therefore, it becomes very difficult for human beings to understand the fact whether they are alive or sleepwalking. And that's why Vladimir has said in the opening remark of the soliloquy, "Was I sleeping while others suffered? Or am I sleeping now when I am speaking my soliloquy? Is my life an illusion or is my life real?" Vladimir is saying that there are millions of people who are suffering in the world, but I am oblivious to their suffering. I become conscious when I suffer. And therefore, Vladimir is also suggesting a fact that suffering is a precondition of human existence, and it's very difficult to avoid suffering of any kind. And because there is so much suffering which Vladimir cannot avoid, there is a moment in Vladimir's mind when he says, I cannot go on, I cannot live, I cannot tolerate this life of suffering, this life of sorrow. But a moment later, he interrogates that and says, what have I said? Should have I said that? And of course, his rhetorical question is an answer itself. It simply means, no, I should not have said what I have said, because I am a human being. My purpose in life is to go on and on and on, fully knowing that life is meaningless, life is purposeless. Thus, this soliloquy by Vladimir explores ephemeral nature of human experiences, the futility of waiting, because waiting will ultimately lead to death, the numbing power of habit, and it also suggests that human life is a cycle of ignorance, you can also call it unknowing, waiting, and inevitable decay leading to death. In fact, Vladimir's soliloquy becomes a metaphor for the broader human condition as he grapples with the isolation, alienation, and lack of purpose that accompanies his existence. So far, we have discussed two sets of characters, Vladimir and Estragon, Pozzo and Lucky. Now we'll discuss the last pair of the play, and they are Boy and Godo. The boy in the play is a minor character but symbolically very significant. He appears in both acts of the play. He serves as a messenger from the elusive, invisible, absent Mr. Godo, who comes and tells Vladimir and Estragon that Godo will not be coming today but surely tomorrow. He symbolizes innocence and also the unintentional perpetuation of hope, which may also be false, representing how external promises can drive individuals into cycles of expectation without fulfillment. This boy works for Mr. Godo. And let us discuss this conversation between the boy and the two tramps to find out his role in the play Waiting for Godo. Vladimir says, you work for Mr. Godo? Boy says, yes sir. Vladimir, what do you do? Boy says, I mind the goats, sir. Vladimir says, is he good to you? Boy says, yes sir. Vladimir says, he does not beat you? Boy says, no sir, not me. Vladimir asks, whom does he beat? Boy says, he beats my brother, sir. Vladimir, oh, you have a brother? Boy, yes sir. Vladimir, what does he do? Boy says, he minds the sheep, sir. Vladimir says, and why does not he beat you? Boy says, I don't know, sir. Now this conversation between Vladimir and the boy happens in Act 1. Now the boy who has come to inform Vladimir and Estragon that Godo won't come today but will surely come tomorrow minds the goat. And then there is his brother, as per the report of this boy, who minds the sheep. Now the sheep and the goat, they have symbolic significance in Christianity. In Christianity, goats and sheep represent the distinction between righteous and unrighteous people in God's judgment. This imagery is illustrated in the parable of the sheep and the goats in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 31 to 46. In the parable, Jesus describes the final judgment where all people are gathered before God, and he separates them as a shepherd would separate sheep from goats. The sheep, representing those who have done good deeds and shown compassion, are placed at his right and are rewarded with eternal life of happiness. In contrast, the goats, symbolizing those who have neglected to show kindness or help those in need, are placed at his left hand and face punishment. Now, the sheep and the goat metaphor serves as a powerful reminder of Christian values and belief in the moral judgment that awaits humanity. Now, here you have to understand this boy who is good, who symbolizes innocence, who minds goat and works for Mr. Godot, is not beaten by Godot. And therefore, this illusion may come to our mind that Godot may be God. That is a possibility which I am suggesting now. Because Godot may also be death, we cannot be certain whether Godot is God or Godot is death. If Godot is God, we are waiting for our redemption, we are waiting for our liberation, we are waiting for our salvation, we are waiting for our mukti, nirvan, kaivalya, moksha, whatever name you want to grant it, you can grant it. And if Godot is death, then we are waiting for the final moment of our life, and of course we are living each and every moment, and all these moments will accumulate, and once it has come to the full circle, we will die. Now what we need to understand here, that God or Godot does not beat this boy. Why? Because this boy minds the goat. And then Vladimir asks him, whom does he beat? Whether God or Godot is beating someone else? Is he punishing someone else? And immediately the boy replies that he beats my brother. And of course, we can understand that his brother might be minding the sheep. And therefore, this idea of reward and punishment, depending upon the sins and the evil deeds that we perform, that immediately surfaces to our mind. 1. Now this happens in Act 1, when boy comes and informs Vladimir and Stragon that Godot will come tomorrow. Now the boy reappears in Act 2, and this part of the slide is the conversation between boy and Vladimir in the second act of the play. Boy comes and says, Mr. Albert. Vladimir says, off we go again. Do you not recognize me? Boy says, no sir. Vladimir says, it was not you came yesterday? Boy says, no sir. Vladimir, this is your first time? Boy says, yes sir. Vladimir says, you have a message from Mr. Godot? Boy says, yes sir. Vladimir says, he won't come this evening? Boy says, no sir. Vladimir says, but he will come tomorrow? Boy says, yes sir. Vladimir says, without fail? Boy says, yes sir. Now this boy has come. They are identical. They look the same. And therefore Vladimir has this illusion that this is the same boy who had come yesterday to inform them that Godot will not come today, Godot will come tomorrow. Now Vladimir has this illusion. However, the boy says, no, he is not the same boy. Now there is a possibility that this boy may be the brother of the boy who had come yesterday. And this boy also promises that Godot will not come today, Godot will come tomorrow. And here you have to understand the meaning of the play Waiting for Godot. What is Godot? Who is Godot? Godot is tomorrow. Tomorrow, and 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 tomorrow. I can go on and on as long as, to prove that my saying tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow again and again becomes nonsensical. That's how human beings live. Human beings live for tomorrow. They wait for tomorrow, fully knowing that this tomorrow is going to be transformed into past. Tomorrow, which looks so lovely, which looks so beautiful, which looks so seductive, will become useless, futile, a waste. So this waiting for Godot is symbolical of human beings waiting for something to happen tomorrow. That can be one interpretation of Godot. And I have already told you that Godot may also refer to God, although Beckett has famously said, had he meant Godot to be God, he would have categorically said so in the play. And there is no clear-cut indication in the play to suggest that Godot is God, and therefore it becomes very difficult for us to say that Godot is God. Then we may also say that Godot is death. So Godot can be hope, Godot can be God, Godot can be death. It depends upon you how you interpret Godot. If you are pessimistic, your Godot may be death. If you are absolutely optimistic, your Godot may be hope, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And if you are religious, your Godot may be a theological God. It may be a personal God for whom you are waiting. Whatever Godot is, God, hope, death, Godot is certainly granting some meaning to Vladimir and Estragon. Vladimir and Estragon, they postponed their suicide in Act 1 and in Act 2 only because they want to hear from Godot. They want to know what Godot has to say to them, what Godot has to speak to them. And therefore, Godot, although absent, although outside, although invisible, although transcendental, has a very important role to play in the play Waiting for Godot. That's all for today. We'll meet in our next class. Thank you.